Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Deanna Minich, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you about Maca: when, how, why, and what to use clinically for women's hormone health from fertility to menopause. We're going to cover the whole lifespan and talk about how nutrition professionals can be helping women during different phases of life. These are my disclaimers and disclosures. Note that this is only for educational use. And also, I do want to disclose that I am Chief Science Officer for Symphony Natural Health, which does make a Maca phenotype product for women's health. All right, our learning objectives. First and foremost, I'd like to clarify any kind of misconceptions about the different types of maca that are available and how they are differentiated relative to other adaptogenic and even hormone active plant agents. I want to talk about some of the clinical data using maca preparations for women's health and to discuss how maca provides a very, I would call it a novel therapeutic to be used as an adjunct to hormone replacement therapy, should that be used. All right, so let's dive in talking about the time that we are living in, which is very dynamic, especially for women. We are seeing greater awareness now as it relates to women looking into living I would say, the next half of their lives from 50 on up to 100. So, what we're seeing is that there are doctors, celebrities, social media influencers all talking about what women can be doing for menopause. So, menopause is at the forefront now. And I would say that it is at an all time high. So, this is a very relevant conversation for this day and age. Hormones are obviously a very pivotal aspect of women's health. And in fact, what do we lose during that menopausal transition? We lose hormones. And so that is first and foremost what people tend to go after is what are some options to replace and replenish those hormones? There are a number of different options that are available. And of course, like anything else, there are pros and cons of each of them. The first one is hormone replacement therapy, which is known as HRT, and it definitely can be effective. However, there can be some risks for certain women. So, certain population types just may not do well with hormone replacement therapy. And some other women do have a mindset about taking exogenous hormones. Some women would prefer not to take it, whether it's because of their family history, their personal history, or their overall philosophy about taking something exogenous like that to change their hormone levels. In fact, there was one study in which they found that 77% of women were reluctant to do HRT despite having symptoms. So even though they were in the state of needing help, needing assistance, they were still not willing to do HRT. And I know that we've come a long way in terms of looking at the Women's Health Initiative in a very different way, but I think that there's still some resistance. And perhaps it's not the best approach for some women. So, what ends up happening is then women start to look along the continuum of all the different options and say, okay, well, what else could I be doing? If it's not HRT, could I take a dietary supplement that contains phytoestrogens? And I did take some time to go through the scientific literature on phytoestrogens some years ago and have recently revisited that. And what I have found there is that, well, first and foremost, I love plants. I have no issue with phytoestrogens or plant compounds. I wish people would have more plants in their diet. But when we're looking to see whether or not plant estrogens will be an effective way of quelling menopausal symptoms, and then further down the line, protecting her bones, her brain, and even her heart, I don't think that the science is compelling enough. And in fact, in some cases, what you find in studies is that the placebo does better than the plant estrogen for menopausal symptom reduction. So, yes, I'm all about plants. I'm all about plant estrogens. I just don't think that they can provide to many women the support that they're looking for. So I would say to first, before, identifying an agent to get in and address symptoms, me as a scientist, I like to look at, well, what is the root cause? What is the root cause of menopause? So when we look at the exact root cause, I think as we start to whittle through a lot of the nutrition and lifestyle factors, what we see is that biologically, what is happening is that a woman is having the decline or the dysfunction of her endocrine system. And the way I'm going to talk about this is in the way of an axis. So the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenal, gonadal axis, or in the case of a woman, her ovarian axis. So HPTAO axis. Her HPTAO axis is the signals aren't as strong or the feedback isn't as robust. So there is this decline in endocrine communication throughout her body. And that just happens as a matter of course, right? So eventually we come to the point that we're not as fertile. So what determines the age at which a woman goes through menopause? Because some women it takes them into their 60s sometimes. That's very rare, but it can happen that they don't go through menopause until 60s at some point. And then for other women, they're going through menopause very early in life, like in their 30s. But the average age is around 52. Well, we can look at a lot of different factors here. We can look at age, birth month, genetics, and even environmental factors. So, some of the questions to ask yourself would be: does she have a high toxin load? Is she highly stressed? Does she have other underlying chronic conditions? All of those things and many more will add to that decline of her endocrine system. So, the clinical goal would be to improve the function of the hypothalamus pituitary in order to communicate better with the ovaries, and of course, with the thyroid and with the adrenals. And then to complete that feedback loop with the signal back from the ovaries to the hypothalamus, right? We want this circuitry, we want this loop, we want to enable this bi-directional flow. And what we know is that in general, nutrition and lifestyle can be very helpful for establishing that better communication. I see that as foundational. That's where nutrition and what you're doing comes in. However, as women start to go through these peaks and troughs of hormones and what is happening, and eventually not producing a lot of hormones, they may need a little bit more and they may need something different. So, in general, the way I think about hormones is that they communicate vitality. So, with increased age, what tends to happen is our hormones start to decrease. And we see that even in the nomenclature of the different aspects of aging. We have menopause, which aligns to reduced hormone levels, especially estrogen and progesterone, adrenopause, lower DHEA, andropause, lower testosterone, somatopause, lower growth hormone, IGF-1, and even melatonopause or lowered amounts of melatonin. So essentially, all the hormones are connected in a web. And if you have lowered amounts of one hormone, chances are you're going to be affecting the web of all the other hormones. So, what I would say here is that for the sake of our conversation about women's health, we're mostly going to be focused in on menopause, but truly, we are affecting all hormones through the decline of those specific hormones. So here's just another way that I see it: the hormonal pauses, the decline in hormones with increased age, all the way from melatonin through the pineal gland, growth hormone through the pituitary, androgens through, well, primarily, we think of the adrenal glands or even the gonads. Then the estrogen and progestogens, we think of the ovaries, the adrenals, adipose tissue, and then the adrenal adrenogens, of course, the adrenal glands. So the entire endocrine circuit starts to undergo this transformation as we get older. So let me just give you some of the terminology so that it's very clear as I start to use all of these menopausal words what I'm referring to. And I think that this gets a little bit sloppy out there in the ethers, whether it's on social media or in books. And there are actual medical stages and ways to codify these periods of life. So let me just tour you through them quickly. Premenopausal refers to the menstruating period or the stage of life that would convey fertility. So, this is the time in which a woman is fertile. She's having a menstrual cycle, premenopausal. Perimenopausal is more of a transitional period or stage of life. And here we see changes in things like estradiol, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone. Sometimes the menstrual cycle, the consistency starts to change, and there can be symptoms, and that can range between 3 to 15 years. And then eventually, and sometimes that gets a little bit worse at certain time periods. Eventually, when there is 12 consecutive months with no period, no menstrual period, at the point at which that 12-month time frame has been reached, a woman is said to hit menopause. Menopause is actually 1 day, or you could think of it as 1 month. It's the final month that she hasn't had a period. Postmenopause is once a woman has hit menopause, everything thereafter is postmenopausal. So that is, if we're looking at perimenopausal, we're looking at perhaps during puberty, something on the order of maybe the age of 10 until about the age of 35. And then perhaps perimenopausal in this day and age, I would say maybe 35 to about 50. And then menopause between 50 and 52. The average age is 52. And then postmenopause, we're looking at something on the order of mid 50s until death. So postmenopause is a stage of life where women are spending a lot of time. So, what happens in the perimenopause? Because this can be a time of great upheaval, lots of different symptoms, and you can see all of these listed here. In fact, I kind of see it as a syndrome. There are a lot of physical changes in different body systems, and some of them involve temperature changes. So, things like hot flushes, night sweats, disrupted sleep. I know for myself that was some of the biggest ones. Definitely the sleep, nausea, loss of balance, weakness, dehydration. Just overall, the body is changing its form. The brain is changing. How we think is changing. But overall, there are many physical changes. And what's unique is that it's not the same for every woman. For some women, they have negligible hot flushes. They might have more in the way of things like changes in appetite, increased body weight, but they don't get the hot flushes. Or maybe it's just the reverse, maybe more fatigue. There can be subtle aspects that you might not even consider to be perimenopausal, but it is a change. When I think of perimenopause, again, I'm thinking physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. So when we think of emotional, there's a lot of shift in the brain during perimenopause and even during postmenopause. So you can see a lot of emotional changes, mood swings, irritability. What I have heard mostly from women going through this time of life is anger, a lot of volatile anger. And anger is not one of those emotions that's very easy for women to process. It's not very well accepted. And many of us have not been taught how to deal with anger. So it just kind of volcanoes out during this perimenopausal time. And so just waxing through all of these different types of emotions, and that could vary again based on the woman, and things like adverse childhood events, traumas of various types, and everything else that she's got going on in her life. Mental changes. Like I mentioned, there are some significant neural changes in the female brain that happen through the perimenopause and into the postmenopause. So she might be having less ability to concentrate, more mental fatigue. She can't remember things anymore. So this perhaps is one of the more bothersome aspects for some women, where they call it the the menopause brain. I'm feeling that brain fog. And then finally, I think it's worth acknowledging the spiritual changes with perimenopause. And in fact, I thought that this is very interesting that there was a study showing that higher levels of spirituality were associated with less menopausal symptoms. So, what is spirituality? It's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The way that I see it is it's a sense of meaning, purpose, and even how you feel connected to others and society, to your life's mission, to nature, to animals, to every little thing. How do you feel connected? I think that's really the essence. And sometimes perimenopause is a very lonely journey where you start to feel isolated. You start to feel like your body is changing, your emotions are scattered, your mind is not centered and clear. And so things like your spiritual practices and your orientation to life can also start to feel the effects of that. So, maintaining a spiritual practice of some sort, whatever works for that individual, whether it's meditating, praying, or having a ritual of some type in order to give a better sense of meaning and purpose, could be beneficial for keeping, I would say, present, keeping present rather than just feeling very fragmented and dissociated. All right, so the role of hormones in aging. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I already mentioned the HPTAO axis. There is this circuitry within us of the endocrine system. And what defines the endocrine system is that it is a gland that produces a hormone that travels somewhere else in the body for its activity. So you have autocrine, paracrine, endocrine. Endocrine is clearly a hormone, like the pineal gland produces melatonin. Melatonin doesn't stay in the pineal gland, it travels throughout the body to all the different cell types, keys into those clock genes, and gets the entire body synchronized to circadian rhythm. So, this endocrine system, I would say the only thing I want to mention here is that there continues to be more expansion as it relates to the endocrine system. And what we are finding is that things like the skin are considered endocrine, things like the liver, the muscle are considered endocrine, or even the adipose tissue. So what we are finding is that the body as a whole is very hormonal, very neuroendocrine. And that's why I say it's not just about the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis keying us into the stress response. What we're looking at here is the psychoneuroendocrine, and I would even say immune system. All of these systems are interrelated. So that's why I was saying when we start to see declines in one type of hormone, we start to see a web like effect where other hormones are impacted because of the interrelationship of all of these different body systems. Sometimes it's not our hormones, but what interferes with them that can cause those health issues. And I want to bring this up because so often we get to think that, oh, I just need more hormones or it's my hormones doing it. It may actually be an endocrine disruptor in the environment that is in our bodies that is creating this change because these are look-alike xenoestrogens and they can get in the way of our endogenous hormone, whether it's the production, the balance, all of those different aspects. So I do think that that's where detoxification is a wonderful nutritional guideline or even something to be thinking about as women start to go through the perimenopausal time to let's get rid of the endocrine noise from external environmental agents. So let's talk about maca. Let's get into maca a little bit to see how maca as a botanical might be able to help with some of these endocrine issues that women experience. So when I think of maca, this is a picture of maca here. You can see it is a tuber. So it's very much like a beet. It grows in the ground. You've got that tuberous portion, which is really starchy. Then you've got all of the little fine roots coming off of it. Then you have the upper part, you have the stem, and then you have the leaves. And so, depending on which part of the plant is used, will determine the function that you're getting in return. And so that's why when you start to look at some of the studies on maca, I want you to be looking at the methods section. What part of the plant was used? Where was it grown? What color was it? Was it an extract? Was there a certain concentration of an active? So think about maca as, well, surely a food, we see that in Peru, but when we're using it as a therapeutic endocrine agent, we want to know more specifics. All right, so here are some of the medicinal uses of maca and looking at some of the history of maca. Now, I had the opportunity to go to Peru. That was just more for a vacation, but it was so interesting because I got to see how maca is used in now modern society in the place that it is natively grown. And I've seen it mostly, I would say, in the farmers markets as a powder, just a powder, as black maca or red maca or yellow maca. So in general, maca, if we think of it as a food, it is considered a cruciferous root vegetable. How many of you knew that? So it is actually a cousin of broccoli, Brussels sprouts, a lot of the cruciferous vegetable family. If we look at the genus and the species, there are two different kinds of maca. There's the wild crafted form called Lepidium myanae, and then Lepidium peruvianum, which is the cultivated form. But I think all you need to know there is that it's part of the Lepidium uh, genus. So it's related to the Brassicaceae family, and it is native to Peru. In fact, it needs environmental stress to create the healthful components that we need for the endocrine system. So keep in mind, again, that it is native to Peru. What has happened subsequent to its long history of growing in Peru is that people from other countries have taken it and tried to grow it in other areas like in China or Tibet, but the replication of what you see in Peruvian maca is definitely not the same. If you go back to the 15th, 16th centuries, what you see is that native Peruvians used maca primarily for increasing energy and fertility. And if you ask these days a botanical expert of some type, like an herbalist or somebody who deals more with herbs, what they would say about maca is that it's an adaptogen, meaning that it stimulates the adrenal glands. So this is just showing you a little bit of the layout, the family tree of maca in the plant kingdom. So you can see here the family is Brassicaceae, and that's why, again, maca is a cousin to things like cruciferous vegetables, but it does have its own genus, and it's called Lepidium. And under that, you get two different kinds of species, and we're going to be talking about one of those today called Lepidium peruvianum. The formal name is also Lepidium peruvianum chacon. Lepidium peruvianum chacon was named for Gloria de Chacon, who was a researcher in Peru back in the 1960s who identified it. In fact, her PhD was more specific to looking at this type of maca and its endocrine effects. So I think it's really beautiful in some ways that a female researcher decades ago really started this whole investigation into looking at a certain kind of maca for women's endocrine health. You have other researchers as well who have explored things like certain types of maca for prostate health too. So it's not just for women, but what I'm going to be talking about is more focused on women. So, this is a summary of different functions. We know that plants serve many different roles. It's not like you just have one plant, one function. So, if you look on the left here, you see all the different scientific functions. It's vast. There are a lot of different things that maca is doing. It's an antioxidant, it's a chemopreventative, detoxification support, immunomodulation, stress tolerance, all of these things. And so, how would this translate into a condition? Well, typically you see different health benefits. In fact, I'll show you on the next slide, but we did publish a review article looking at some of the health benefits of maca and really going deep into okay, what has actually been studied? How has it been used traditionally? How has it been used in the scientific studies? And so this is a list of some of those things that has emerged from looking at a lot of that research. So this is the article that I was just speaking to. And in fact, you can get this online. It's open access through the Nutrients Journal. The team at Symphony Natural Health had published this back in February 2024, and it's called Not All Maca is Created Equal. It's a review of colors, nutrition, phytochemicals, and clinical uses. I think you're going to want to see this. It's very colorful. It goes through the different colors of maca, the research. There is a deep dive into the different clinical studies. And what we found that was most astounding, I would say, was that, first of all, clinically, there were just a little bit over 30 different clinical trials that we reviewed. And we scoured each one of them to look at the materials and methods, to look at, okay, what part of the plant was used? What was the color that was used? What was the active? And what were the outcomes? And we have this whole table in the paper. And what we found was that the research on maca is, I would say that it definitely falls short. Not many researchers were very diligent about reporting the different types of maca that they used, or even the format, or even the part of the plant, or even the location of growing, which we know is really important. So, anyway, I think that you might enjoy this review article. If you get enticed after this webinar and you say, oh, I want more, I want to learn more about maca. I'm still learning more about maca, I must say. And I, spent 8 to 10 months putting this review article together with the team. So if you are also curious and you'd rather not read the research, but read a summary, you might want to go to the website, which is www.lepidiumperuvianum.org. And that'll give you a searchable database on the different kinds of maca. Now, what is distinct is that not all kinds of maca have the same mode of action. So there are different kinds of maca, which I'm going to go into next. Some of them stimulate the adrenals. Some of them are playing more of an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory role, right? So they have all of these pigments within the maca root that would be beneficial. Things like even anthocyanins in more of the purple colored maca, or even some of the carotenoids in the yellow-orange kind of maca, like you see here. Some maca types influence hormone regulation and production. That's where we're going to spend our energy together. And then there may be a role for maca in metabolic detoxification. Now, some of you might know me because of my teaching on metabolic detoxification. And the reason I say this with maca is because, again, remember, it's a cousin to cruciferous vegetables. And we know that cruciferous vegetables and maca both share a phytochemical class called the glucosinolates, which are known to play a role for modifying how we hydroxylate certain estrogen metabolites and play a role in even creating a ratio of those metabolites. There are 17 different distinct maca phenotypes. Now, I bet that that's new for many of you to hear. That was new for me. I did not even realize that. But when you start to go into the literature, you see that maca has 17 phenotypes. There are 6 main colors. Those colors are black, yellow, red, white, gray, and purple. Beautiful, really beautiful to see this spectrum and then shades of each of those. Now, each of these phenotypes have been shown to have a different phytochemical composition, different DNA, and even different function. So they don't all work the same way. The expression of the maca comes through because of a lot of the different environmental factors, things like the seed selection, the elevation, how much stress did it have in its environment? What was the soil like? The microbes, right? The terrain, the any kind of fungus. What was the location exactly? In fact, there are, if I look at what I know about the growing that Symphony does, they grow maca for men's health in a different place than they grow maca for women's health, which is really interesting. So, looking at farming method, crop rotation, is it organic? Is it conventionally grown? When was it harvested? How was it dried? How is it manufactured and gelatinized? Typically what you find is that maca on the market is gelatinized. And the reason why is because it's not very water soluble and it's pretty hard to digest. It can cause bloating. It's very high in starches. So gelatinization, where you take water, temperature, and pressure, you basically try to break down some of those starches, which helps to enable bioavailability as well as efficacy, right? Because if you're making things in the maca more bioavailable, it can be more efficacious. But if you have too much pressure, too much water, or the temperature too high, or just not at the right amount, you can actually damage some of the actives. So you will not have the efficacy. So I think all of these factors are important, even how it's packaged. Because it can be susceptible to breakdown, you want to ensure that it is packaged accordingly and can preserve those different actives. So these different phenotypes have demonstrated diverse physiological effects and even gender affinity. And so let me show you that on the next slide, where you can see that the different maca phenotypes can key into certain of the endocrine glands. So at a different level, right? But for the most part, combination of colors will be impacting the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenal glands, the ovaries and testes. Now, I am putting the prostate gland in here as well because there was a fair bit of research that was done on prostate health using red maca and also some newer research looking at black maca. So I'm including that here in the endocrine system. So, as I was mentioning, there are different activities of maca at the level of the endocrine system. Most maca is going to be affecting the adrenals, right? That's the kind of maca where you go to the grocery store, you're buying maca as a superfood, as a powder. You don't really know what you're getting there. That's just a mixture of all of the different phenotypes, whatever is grown at that time of year. It's mixed up all together. It's not standardized, it's not tested. In the way of knowing what it's doing in the body specifically, chances are that type of maca will be impacting adrenals. There is a clinical formulation of known maca phenotypes that can modulate the entire endocrine axis here, as I've laid out. So the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, ovarian axis. And when you look in the literature, this is called Maca Go, Maca GO. Okay, so the G stands for gelatinized, the O is organic. So Maca GO. When you look at the clinical studies, that's how you would see it in the materials and methods. What's really interesting is that maca has a very unique phytochemical profile, and every plant has its unique phytochemicals, and maca is no different. You see here different categories, and you may not be familiar with some of these categories. I've already talked about the glucosinolates. There are even 9 distinct glucosinolates that you find specifically in maca. And some of those glucosinolates even have what is referred to as acetylcholinesterase inhibition, which means that, well, at least in these cell models, if you go further and do research, what we may end up finding is that they might be good for things like memory and cognition. But right now, we only have cell data to suggest that mechanistically, they would seem to be primed in that direction. Phytosterols is one category you may have heard of. You find those in other plants. Thiohydantoins, alkaloids, and then at the bottom here you see macamides and macaines, which are interesting structures. They look very hormonal in some ways. Macamides are unique to maca, so they're only found in maca, hence the name. But macaines you can actually find in other plants. So there have been a lot of research efforts in the realm of maca. So as I mentioned, Dr. Gloria Chacon, she is referred to as the mother of maca. In fact, that's what I was mentioning. The Lepidium peruvianum that I spoke of is named after her. And up at the top, there is a picture of her. And the other person who is very notable in the area of maca is the gentleman below. This is Dr. Gustavo Gonzalez, and he is a professor, and he has done some incredible work on using maca for men, especially for prostate health. The other person that you see here is Dr. Henry Meissner, who is well published in this area of maca and has, I would say that he took on a lot of the initial work from Dr. Chacon and then went further into clinical trials using certain phenotypes on preclinical research, and then went even further to figure out how these different phenotypes were working in women. So you can see, putting all of these great minds together, researchers have come together. There was a great publication in 2020, and it was between all of the organizations you see at the bottom there. And what they did was they went further into characterizing maca, looking at a metabolomic analysis, genetic sequencing, and really trying to define maca at a much greater, deeper level than had been done before. As far as cultivating maca, harvesting it, manufacturing it, there's a lot that goes into any plant, right? And so looking at, as I was mentioning before, all of the different factors that can affect maca, it can be variable depending on the environment, the country, the seed, the expression of all of those stressors that are out there, and even what time of day was the plant picked? How was it dried? Was it using fans or just the natural traditional methods of drying in the sun and then covering at night? All these different things go into the maca, which can have a role in its function. So again, let's go back to the Maca GO, which is in clinical studies. I'm going to go through some of those clinical studies because it's the only form of maca that has been shown to modulate hormone production in peri and in postmenopausal women. So this clinically researched formulation contains a combination of maca colors, actually. Very distinct proportions, and this is proprietary, but black, yellow, purple, and red maca. And this in combination, I'm just going to call it Maca GO for ease, rather than specify all of these different phenotypes. It's been extensively studied for its impact on hormone health and different body systems like bone health and metabolic markers. And when you look in the scientific publications, you will see that it's called out as being up to 99% gelatinized, right? So it's going to be more bioavailable. There's a specific process for that. It's cultivated in a certain part of Peru, and it does have standardized known amounts of glucosinolates and phytosterols. When you look at maca GO versus maca on the market, first of all, maca as a plant is incredibly rich in nutrition. It has, as I mentioned, it's very rich in carbohydrates. It's also rich in different amino acids, which can serve as precursors to things like neurotransmitters, dietary fiber, fatty acids, vitamin C. You can see all the different vitamins and minerals. And of course, all of the different phytochemicals, depending on the color, you could have different levels of those different phytochemicals. I did want to show you too that you see the amino acid chromatograph at the top and then glucosinolates. So the Maca GO is in lanes 1 and 6. And the number of bars speaks to the complexity. The strength or the deep color of the bar speaks to the concentration. So here we have Maca GO in lanes 1 and 6 compared with known maca extracts. So 10 to 1 and a 5 to 1 concentration. And what you can see is that you don't quite have the same complexity or concentration in both glucosinolates and amino acids that you do in some of those extracts on the market compared with Maca Geo. So I think that's worth noting. There are 4 clinical trials that have been published on Maca Geo, which I'm going to tour you through, but I just wanted to give you kind of the highlight here. So one study was in perimenopausal women. One was actually 3 of them were in early postmenopausal women. And so the summary of the data was that there were shifts in the hormone levels. So optimization of things like FSH, LH, estradiol, progesterone, cortisol, improve bone density, improve body composition and lipids, and reduce menopausal symptoms. And I'm going to take you a bit through that, but I just wanted you to zoom out and kind of see all the different things that Maca Geo has been able to do in clinical trials. So let's just first start with the postmenopausal women. And I think that how the studies were put together were rather unique. So, what we see here is that at baseline, these women came into the study and then they were assigned to either placebo, which is the first bar, the gray bar, or Maca Geo. And what you see is that clearly, even from the first month up into the 4th month, that was the duration of the study, that there was a bump in estradiol levels. But you also see a plateauing here, right? So it's not that you take a postmenopausal woman and give her estrogen levels that are similar to a 30-year-old woman. You give her biologically appropriate hormone levels. So that keeps it more consistent with that stage of life, which I think is probably safer and can give just enough of a therapeutic bump and help to relieve symptoms and yet not go over the top with high, exorbitantly high levels of things like estradiol, which for some people could be problematic. This is looking at follicle stimulating hormone. And what we see with FSH is that women with FSH levels of greater than 30 are considered to be in menopause or postmenopausal. And so you can see I made that dashed line there to denote 30. So clearly at baseline, the women in this trial were menopausal. And so as they continued on with placebo and Maca Geo, what you see is that the Maca Geo group did come down in their FSH, but again, not to the point where we took them out of menopause and put them back into the premenopausal state. So they're not going from being in their 50s to, from a hormonal standpoint, looking like they're in their 30s. So it's not doing that, right? So this is more, I would say, an endocrine action that is more biologically appropriate. What about symptom relief? Well, what we see here is that this is using the Cooperman's menopausal index. And you can see at baseline, the higher the number, the greater the symptoms. Month 1, you can see symptoms are just slightly reduced. That was just on placebo. But then when the women transitioned over to Maca Geo, symptoms came down. So the level of success with reducing menopausal symptoms was in 84% of the women. And what's really unique, I think, about the perimenopausal and overall menopausal symptom relief is that Maca Geo was able to really drive at all of the different kinds of symptoms. So not just hot flashes and mood and night sweats, but the whole host of things. So things like energy, things like sleep, things like um, even vaginal dryness and libido. So across the board, addressing all of the different perimenopausal complaints. Now, when it comes to cardiometabolic health, we know that heart disease is still the #1 killer of women, and that goes up dramatically when a woman enters into her 50s. And we know that for women who are menopausal and into their postmenopause, this can continue to be an issue. So, looking at blood lipids is important. And we know that there's a relationship between blood lipids and hormones. So within the study, looking at for 4 months here, looking at a variety of different factors. We know again that estradiol was impacted. And so what we see here is increases in HDL cholesterol, triglycerides are coming down, and there are favorable improvements in body mass index. So, favorable indications and movements in the area of cardiometabolic health. Now, bone health, this is definitely on so many women's radars, and it can be challenging because I think we've all done a good job in communicating as nutrition professionals that it's important to have calcium and vitamin D and vitamin K and get your minerals, get your weight bearing exercise. I think that that message has been heard, but when a woman goes through perimenopause, she starts to have a rapid loss of bone. So by the time she hits menopause, just right within that 3 to 5 year period, she starts to lose 7 to 10% of her bone mass. So that starts to accelerate. But it's not like she's eating differently or getting different levels of vitamin D or even exercising differently. It's almost like she feels like she has to work harder and she needs to do more. And really what's at play here is the lack of estrogen, right? Because we know that estrogen helps to reduce bone loss. We know that progesterone and testosterone help with bone growth. So, as you can see here, the group that was on Maca did increase in bone density, whereas, as you might anticipate, the placebo started to come down. That's with obviously no intervention there. And we also saw that minerals were increased in the group on Maca, and this was also seen with iron and other minerals. Hair, skin, and nail support. I think this is something that often gets focused on, and perhaps that's something that women start to pay attention to immediately. We know that hair, skin, and nails are all under some type of hormonal influence and also mineral influence. There are a lot of different root causes that would go into this, of course. But as I mentioned, because we're improving hormones, we are changing even, you can see here, iron. I showed you calcium levels. We might be able to be helping with hair, skin, and nails for certain women who are experiencing some issues there. So, with mental health, I think it's also worthwhile to note that, how can we support a woman who is postmenopausal through this endocrine effect of Maca? And what we saw based on studies and questions within the different validated questionnaires was that there was an improvement in mental health or an improvement in mood, an improvement in things like concentration or energy level. And so, if we're changing a woman's outlook on life, we're going to be changing her behaviors, her actions. And so, I think that we can't overlook mental health as a huge feature of some type of intervention for the postmenopause. Now, I know that I've been talking about menopause in the way of just natural menopause, but there's also this case report in which this particular patient had surgically induced menopause, meaning that she had a hysterectomy and an oophorectomy. So, no ovaries, no uterus. And so, this 32-year-old female, she had a history of hormonal imbalance, and with these surgeries came the onset of what looked like menopause. So, hot flashes, night sweats, anxiety, and mood changes. So, she was put on a nutrition plan. She was put on Maca, targeted nutrients, so certain supplements, and lifestyle recommendations. And in 2 months, she had safe and effective resolution of hot flashes and anxiety, as well as improvements in moods and sleep. So, this is where I begin to think about nutrition professionals like yourself in terms of thinking, how can I create an integrative, holistic, functional, whatever your orientation is, but essentially having nutrition as the basis, the foundation, personalizing that, and then layering on top as a first line approach a plant active like Maca, to optimize the endocrine system, right? So let her body do her thing and give her these plant signaling agents in order to ease and streamline the communication among the endocrine axis, right? That's kind of how I see it. I do think that Maca serves a great, I would say, a tool in a nutritionist's toolkit in order to help to align to a nutrition and lifestyle type of program. Shifting over from postmenopause over to perimenopause, I just want to show you some of the impacts here. What you see with Maca, and this was published. You can see the citation above. We are looking at estradiol, progesterone, and what you might appreciate is that in a perimenopausal woman, there is a dynamic flux and rapid changes that are occurring. And so, what we want to balance is not just one hormone, we want to have all of them really coming into alignment. So, you can see here this increase in estradiol. You can see a bump in progesterone as well when they were on Maca versus on placebo. So, this is also showing that. This is showing now estradiol and showing again that initial bump, kind of that plateauing. And then when she goes back to placebo, you can see how the levels come down. You know, again, this really speaks to what I was talking about as it related to phytoestrogens. Many times, of course, I was talking more about menopausal symptoms, but sometimes, is there a placebo effect on hormones? Well, this rules any placebo effect out because there was clearly, with this kind of study design going from active to placebo, seeing that shift in the levels of hormones. And again, keep in mind that Maca has no hormones in it. It is, again, different colorful phenotypes of maca in a standardized, highly bioavailable, concentrated formula in order to help the body to work better. And again, this research goes back to Dr. Chacon's work, which was really novel for the time. And I'm so glad that Dr. Meissner had built upon that. Here you see progesterone levels. Again, just kind of spotlighting that for you with the increase and then the decrease happening once she goes on placebo. And then looking at cardiometabolic health, this is in perimenopausal women now, and you see more panels here. You can see HDL cholesterol going up, body weight coming down, systolic blood pressure coming down a bit, LDL cholesterol coming down, and triglycerides. So, again, what we see is a really nice pattern of greater normalization of blood lipids and metabolic factors, which would translate into things like body weight. And we also looked at BMI, as I mentioned, in the postmenopausal women. So, shuffling the body's physiology so it retains its vitality and it retains the health through the heart and liver systems too, through these different markers. All right. And I do want to talk about HRT because the first question I get typically is, well, Deanna, can I take Maca with hormone replacement therapy? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. And further, what I would say is that you may even need less HRT if using it in combination with Maca. Now, you as a nutrition professional, you may not be able to prescribe HRT, and so working with a practitioner to talk about Maca and the combination with HRT might be something that you'd want to do in order to better inform protocols for women going through peri and postmenopause. So I have here just some ideas as far as how to start, how to get going, um, kind of the general protocol of how that might be done. But again, that should be done under the guise of a practitioner who is recommending the HRT. And I think what we see in the field is that people do combinations of these two and quite well. And you could be thinking, well, with hormone replacement therapy, you also have to be thinking of, even if it's bioidentical, you still have to take care of the metabolism of those hormones. So that means taking care of metabolic detoxification pathways, which is why, again, just to go back to Maca GO, the fact that it has glucosinolates and certain agents that may help with metabolic detoxification, I think is a good thing. All right, Maca GO versus other herbs. In case you're wondering, here is a table looking at Maca GO with respect to menopausal symptoms and the different body systems compared with things like black cohosh, wild yam, dong quai, soy isoflavones, regular maca, and red clover. So might be something you want to look at. I think that basically, again, back to phytoestrogens, I think that they're great as being part of food, but I think in terms of needing them together with Maca GO, that may not be necessary because the Maca GO is going to do a lot of that heavy lifting through the endocrine system already. But again, I don't, I think phytoestrogens are great plant compounds, they're great flavonoids. There are a number of different case reports on Maca phenotypes if you are interested. I know I talked about 4 clinical trials within this presentation, but then there are individual N of 1 case reports that have been published. And one of them I already talked about, the surgically induced menopause report. But there are others that you might be interested in just to see how other clinicians have used Maca GO with women that are premenopausal. So not necessarily peri and post, but premenopausal. So those are available to you online. And then what about those women who are premenopausal? Well, I do think that Maca GO can also be used for them in terms of helping to regulate their cycle better. You're not introducing any hormones. You are, again, getting in, and instead of encouraging the production of hormones during menopause, you are encouraging the balance of hormones through the access. So, helping to regulate cycles, reduce acne, reduce bloating, and help improve mood status. And that's what a lot of these case studies did go through. So, this one is on PMS and PMDD. And what you're going to see in some of these treatment plans is that they are using Maca GO, again, together with nutrition, in this case, oral progesterone, certain supplements, like this one is magnesium B complex vitamin D, as well as lifestyle. So these results, having favorable results, improving premenstrual headaches, menstrual cramping and flow, and intense psychiatric symptoms, all within 3 months of Maca GO, the bioidentical progesterone, and magnesium. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. Think how many women suffer for decades with these conditions. And, I was one of them. I look back now like, oh my goodness, I would have done so many things differently. So hopefully this comes to you at a time of life when you're young enough and you don't have to endure many decades of suffering. So, or that you can help others too. Then here's another case report, a 39-year-old woman with a history of IBS, rosacea, and environmental allergies, PMS, primary dysmenorrhea, menorrhagia. And you can see here the plan having a variety of different aspects, different supplements, but again, nutrition, lifestyle, and Maca GO, and having complete resolution of PMS, dysmenorrhea, menorrhagia in 4 months, which is, again, tremendous. All right, I'm going to come to a close here. Hopefully, this has been useful for you. Again, menopause is a hot topic these days. We need solutions. We need a whole spectrum of solutions, not just one thing like HRT, or on the other side, not just phytoestrogens. We need things all along the way to match what a woman is looking for. What meets her philosophy? What meets her in that specific time of life, right? So you have to be thinking about a lot of these different aspects. Hopefully, you learned a little bit about maca today in terms of the different colors, the different phenotypes, and how they have different DNA, analytical profiles, and even different physiological effects. You've got to match what you want clinically to the maca phenotype. And I would say, based on our review, that there is truly a lack of clinical data on using maca for hormone regulation, except Maca GO, which has 4 published clinical trials in addition to published case reports. So here is a long list of some of those references, but you can access them through PubMed. Just about all of them are open access, so you can read the details if you want, or just reach out to me and ask me questions. All right, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I hope that this has been informative and inspiring and helps women that you are working with. Thanks so much.